Hi, I'm JJ Gonson from Cuisine en Locale. I am prepping tomatoes to show you how to can them, to put them up for winter. When you have a flood of tomatoes in the summer, this is a good way to keep them around, to have something that's really good to use for a fresh sauce or chili, things like that, with tomatoes in them when you're cooking with tomatoes in the winter. What I'm doing is I'm cutting a very shallow X in the end of this tomato to blanch it, because when you blanch tomatoes, it's much easier to peel them. The reason that you don't can tomatoes with the peels on is that when the peels get processed in the canning process, they get very tough, so you don't want them on your tomatoes. To blanch tomatoes, you just drop them in a pot of rapidly boiling water for about 30 seconds, and then you pull them out. As soon as you see them start to peel and split, you pull them out and drop them in an ice bath, and it shocks them, and then the peels will slip right off. After 30 seconds, you'll see the skins are going to start to split where you cut them. I was reading recipes for blanching tomatoes recently, and I noticed that none of them said to cut the skin. I'm not sure what wonderful chef taught me to do that, but there's no question in my mind that they peel better if you do that. When you shock them in the cold water, the water actually gets underneath the skins and helps to release them. So now you'll see the skins will just slip right off, making it really, really easy to peel them, to get them ready for canning. So what you want to do with your tomatoes, these are nice big tomatoes. They have a very tough inner core. Different tomatoes have different cores, but you do want to get out that tough, fibrous inner core as well as getting rid of the skins, because that's not going to taste so good when you get them out in a couple months. So over here, steaming away, I have canning jars. It is really important that you clean and sterilize your jars before you put food in them to preserve it. If they have any bacteria in them, you can grow bacteria in your canned food. This is a jar lifter. This is actually designed for lifting things out of boiling water. And this is a lid magnet, slightly melted. You can tell I've used it a lot. This is a lid magnet, also designed just for getting the metal lids out of the water. It's not necessary to boil the bands that are going to go around the outside, because they're not actually going to come in contact at all with the food that you're going to eat. So that's not so important. These jars have been in here for more than 10 minutes. 10 minutes is sort of the magic number that you want to make sure they're in for. So when you pack your jars with tomatoes, you want to make sure that you pack them pretty tight. I'm going to cut these because these tomatoes are so big and these jars aren't very big. So I'm going to cut them down. And I'm going to really pack them in there. I want to get a lot of tomato in my jar. Tomatoes, we think of tomatoes as being a fairly acidic food, but they actually sit right on the fence when it comes to how acidic they are. It's very important to have a pH that is lower than 4.6 when you're doing this kind of canning. And tomatoes, depending on how acidic this particular tomato is, can sit on either side of that. So when you're packing tomatoes, the rule of thumb is to add about a tablespoon of lemon per pint. Okay, once you've got your jars pretty well packed, you're going to add 1 tablespoon of fresh lemon juice to each pint jar of tomatoes, and you can just add it straight into on the top here. There's other things, other products that you can use to do this. There's actually a product that is sold by the canning company, which is probably Ball Mason Jar. They sell a product that's a powder, that's an acid that also you can put into canning, or you can use lemon. You could even use vinegar, I believe, but lemon has higher acid. Then with a knife, go down the side of the jars and just make sure that there's no air bubbles trapped along the sides. Ooh, there's a big one. See it? And go get it. You got to get all those air bubbles out. Make sure that the juice is all the way down. So you want to leave about a ½ inch of headspace. So I'm just going to add enough liquid to these to get them to that point. Actually going to add a little bit of hot water just to get them up to the point where there is a ½ inch. So the final part of this process, this again is a magnet. I'm going to go in. I got to be sneaky here. Maybe not. I'm going to go into the water, which is very hot, and grab my little lids. You can see these lids have a rubber gasket around the inside, and that gasket gets soft when you put them in the hot water. It's really important. That's what is going to seal here against the jars of tomatoes. Make sure that you get a good seal. That's got to be clean. I'm not touching the underside of the lid. Then you take a ring. This can be as dirty as you want. It's not going to touch any food. You can use these again, but you can't use these again. You can use the glass jars and the rings, but not the lids. Once the lids have been boiled and that rubber has softened, you can't use it again. You put these on finger tight, not super tight. Okay, now the last step of this process, the last piece of equipment, this is a rack that goes in the bottom of the canner. All of these things, like the magnet and the jar lifter and this particular kettle, this is sort of the standard equipment that you see for canning, for water bath canning, but quite honestly, if you have a clean jar with a clean lid, you could use anything, any kind of pot to put them in, but you have to get them off the bottom. They can't sit bubbling on the bottom of the of your warm bath here. So you actually, no matter what, you do have to make sure you get a rack of some kind, but it could be just a steamer, like a vegetable steamer, as long as they don't hit the bottom. So into the boiling pot, I'm going to lift these carefully. The water level needs to be 1 to 2 inches above the lid of the jar. If it's not enough water when you put them in, it's no big deal. Just grab a kettle, have some boiling water on hand, grab a kettle and add more water. But remember, when you're heating up the pot to get it ready, when you put the jars in to clean them, to boil them and sterilize them, they're going to fill up with water, so they're not going to raise the level of the water at all. But when you put your filled jars in, obviously they're going to displace quite a lot of water. So it is a little hard until you get used to it to estimate how much water you need to boil. These are pint jars. If they were quart jars, I would need to have this pretty much all the way full. So the jars go in for pints. They need to boil for 35 minutes. For quarts, they need to boil for 45 minutes. I'm going to put the lid on to make sure it gets really hot, and I'm going to come back in 35 minutes. Here we are 35 minutes later, and here is my pot of boiling water with my beautiful jars in it. I'm going to take my lovely jar lifter, and very carefully, now these are really hot. Be careful, do not touch hot jars, you will regret it. And when you take them out, what's happened is as they've been in the water bath, there's been a lot of expansion going on, and they're pushing up, 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 and they push out all the air that might have germs in it inside the jars. And then when you take them out, everything shrinks again, pulling the caps down, and that rubber gasket has melted in the process because it's very hot in there. Oh, I already heard one. I don't know if you heard that little pop, but that's the sound that says that they're sealing. And their seals, the air is contracting again, and it's pulling, as they shrink, and it's pulling those seals back down. And that's what makes them sterile and sealed. These are shelf stable, which means that you can put them in your cabinet. You want to keep them in a cool, dark place, not in full sunlight. They will separate as they cool. The liquids will go to the bottom and the food will float to the top. That's totally normal. It's not a problem. It's just how it is. The tighter you pack them, the less liquid you're going to get on the bottom. But if you just have one that's half full, just make sure you top it off with hot liquid. But it's okay if it floats a little bit. So here they are. Now, this winter I could use these for making spaghetti sauce and surprising everybody with fresh tomatoes. Enjoy.